Yes. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night. I am your host, Shayna, and this is One Track Record. Happy New Year! I hope all of you had a wonderful Christmas, a wonderful New Year, and I am happy to be back. I have been working and kind of getting my bearings together for this new year. I appreciate your patience. And if you are new here, thank you. Please hit the like button. If you haven't already, hit subscribe and hit all notifications so that you are constantly up to date with not just the content, but if any bonus content drops or for any updates in the community section. Okay. This is a family. Okay. My track star family, to be precise. We are ripping and running it. We're at our own pace here. We are going to finish our race. We're going to walk in purpose this year. We're going to walk in power. Amen. So, again, thank you for being here. Thank you for those who have donated, and especially those who have simply donated their time just to engage with the family, engage with the content. You know I appreciate you. You already know that. You are loved. You are appreciated. Thank you. Now, let's get down to business. So, today's content is the initial mark of the new series, The Inner Child. For those of you who have been around previously, you know that I came out with the story of the little match girl. If you're looking for that story, I apologize, but I had taken that down because the audio due to my Wi-Fi was so bad that I'm like, no, this is disrespectful. I'm going to re-record this and re-release that, and that's that. Okay? So, apologies if you're looking for it and couldn't find it. But for those of you who were there for the release of the initial episode, you're ahead of the game then. And you know what the inner child in this series is all about. Okay? This is not really to condemn anyone as far as the inner child. It's more of it's a more in-depth self-reflection, such as the mirror series we've already covered on the channel. But how is this episode, like previous episodes, different today? Well, this episode is different off of the fact that I'll be doing an actual reading and not a script. Okay, so this is not anything that I've written or remixed or any of that. This comes from Antoine de Saint-Exupéry's The Little Prince or Le Petit Prince. Okay, so why is the story of The Little Prince so important? Why should you even care, right? That's always a good question. Let's start there. Well, The Little Prince is so popular that it has sold 140 million copies worldwide. Okay, let's just start there. Now, little fun facts for you. The Little Prince was published in the year 1943 in both English and in French in New York. Shout out to my New York people. And it was published about a year before the author was, well, before he died. Okay. Very tragic, but don't want to highlight that. Here's why the story is so important. So the story is about a life lived through the curiosity of a child and how he navigates through the world of adulthood. Okay, so the young child is a prince, and as a prince, he visits various planets. So he has his own planet, but he ends up visiting about 6 other planets in search of something greater than himself while also exploring the unknown. Same way we've all managed to get through life, transitioning from childhood to adulthood, right? But while on his journey, he discovers not just adulthood, but he also begins to weigh the pros and cons of social interaction and also explores the elements of nature. He has a newfound respect for the elements. Powerful, right? Because, like I've kind of discussed somewhat on this channel, and for those who know that I network with other people, in my opinion, the best way to connect with God is through nature, right? Through what he created, his creation. But this book has literally just been so impactful that it's been translated into over 500, yes, 500 different languages worldwide and is only second to the Bible. Think about that. So keep that in the back of your mind as to why this book would be second banana to the Bible. And over time, it's been developed into different forms of media. So, like today, it's been developed into audio recordings, but that's not where it stops. There's been radio plays, live stage plays, movies, as far as claymation, regular animation, like 2-dimensional. It's been on television, and there's even been a developed opera off of this children's story. Okay? So if this was just a regular children's story, right? I don't think it would get as much buzz as what we know of it right now to this current day. So think about all the above mentioned while I'm reading this. Also, for your entertainment, because let's be honest, I'm gonna call a spade a spade. It'd be pretty boring if I just read a quote unquote impactful book like this that has illustrations and I didn't provide any type of illustrations for you because Shayna, sis, what you doing? So I decided to try my best to multitask while reading. And not only did I include some of the original illustrations that Antoine de Saint-Exupery has published in his book, because yes, he did make his own drawings for the book, but I also included some more maybe modern versions of fan art and some newly published work so that you could follow along with me for those who may not have the book or you do have it, but you'd like to see some maybe more modern art. Okay? I am a person who likes to learn visually, so for those who like to learn visually also, or just have an appreciation for art, this episode is for you. Love you. But giving credit ultimately to, of course, the author and to also Elena Schweitzer, Palitra Publishing, and Elina Ellis. Elina Ellis, I don't believe she has formally released anything, but through blogs on the internet, she has released just a few of her drawings and her artwork, and I thought they were really beautiful. So shout outs to, again, Elena Schweitzer, Palitra Publishing, and Elina Ellis. I will be putting that in the description for those who may want to look into the artwork to see what other artwork they have provided. But without further ado, let's get into this story. That's enough for me. Shut up, Trina. Anyway, yes, so you're going to hear me flip some pages because I'm literally reading out of the book. But today's translation for the English, because again, this was originally written in French. Thank you to Richard Howard for translating this into English so we can all follow, because your girl would butcher French. I'm not going to hold you. I'm a little better at Spanish. Okay. I'm going to get serious. Okay. Once, when I was 6, I saw a magnificent picture in a book about the jungle called True Stories. It showed a boa constrictor swallowing a wild beast. Here's a copy of the picture. And in the book it said, boa constrictors swallow their prey whole without chewing. Afterward, they are no longer able to move, and they sleep during the 6 months of their digestion. In those days, I thought a lot about jungle adventures and eventually managed to make my first drawing. Using a colored pencil, my drawing, number 1, looked like this. I showed the grown-ups my masterpiece, and I asked them if my drawing scared them. They answered, "Why be scared of a hat?" My drawing was not a picture of a hat. It was a picture of a boa constrictor digesting an elephant. Then I drew the inside of the boa constrictor so the grown-ups could understand. They always need explanations. My drawing number 2 looked like this. The grown-ups advised me to put away my drawings of boa constrictors outside or inside and apply myself instead to geography, history, arithmetic, and grammar. That is why I abandoned at the age of 6 a magnificent career as an artist. I had been discouraged by the failure of my drawing number 1 and of my drawing number 2. Grown-ups never understand anything by themselves, and it is quite exhausting for children to have to provide explanations over and over again. So, then I had to choose another career, and I learned to pilot airplanes. I have flown almost everywhere in the world, and, as a matter of fact, geography has been a big help to me. I could tell China from Arizona at first glance, which is very useful if you get lost during the night. So, I have had in the course of my life lots of encounters with lots of serious people. I have spent lots of time with grown-ups, and I have seen them at close range, which hasn't much improved my opinion of them. Whenever I encountered a grown-up who seemed to me at all enlightened, I would experiment on him with my drawing number 1, which I have always kept. I wanted to see if he really understood anything, but he would always answer, "That's a hat." Then I wouldn't talk about boa constrictors or jungles or stars. I would away myself on his level and talk about bridges and golf and politics and neckties. And my grown up was glad to know such a reasonable person. So I lived all alone without anyone I could really talk to until I had to make a crash landing in the Sahara Desert 6 years ago. Something in my plane's engine had broken, and since I had neither a mechanic nor passengers in the plane with me, I was preparing to undertake the difficult repair job by myself. I mean, for me, it was a matter of life or death. I had only enough drinking water for 8 days. The first night, then, I went to sleep on the sand 1,000 miles from any inhabited country. I was more isolated than a man shipwrecked on a raft in the middle of the ocean. So you can imagine my surprise when I was awakened at daybreak by a funny little voice saying, "Please, draw me a sheep." What? Draw me a sheep. I leaped up as if I had been struck by lightning. I rubbed my eyes hard. I stared, and I saw an extraordinary little fellow staring back at me very seriously. Here is the best portrait I managed to take of him later on, but of course my drawing is much less attractive than my model. This is not my fault. My career as a painter was discouraged at the age of 6 by the grown-ups, and I had never learned to draw anything except boa constrictors outside and inside. So I stared wide-eyed at this apparition. Don't forget that I was 1,000 miles from any inhabited territory. Yet this little fellow seemed to be neither lost nor dying of exhaustion, hunger, or thirst, nor did he seem scared to death. There was nothing in his appearance that suggested a child lost in the middle of the desert 1,000 miles from any inhabited territory. When I finally managed to speak to him, I asked him, "But what are you doing here?" And then he repeated, very slowly and very seriously, "Please, draw me a sheep." In the face of an overpowering mystery, you don't dare disobey. Absurd as it seemed, 1,000 miles from all inhabited regions and in danger of death, I took a scrap of paper and pen out of my pocket. But then I remembered that I had mostly studied geography, history, arithmetic, and grammar, and I told the little fellow, rather crossly, that I didn't know how to draw. He replied, "That doesn't matter. Draw me a sheep." Since I had never drawn a sheep, I made him one of the only 2 drawings I knew how to make. The one of the boa constrictor from outside, and I was astounded to hear the little fellow answer, "No, no, I don't want an elephant inside a boa constrictor. A boa constrictor is very dangerous, and an elephant would get in the way. Where I live, everything is very small. I need a sheep. Draw me a sheep." So then I made a drawing, He looked at it carefully and then said, "No, this one is already quite sick. Make another." I made another drawing. My friend gave me a kind, indulgent smile. "You can see for yourself. That's not a sheep. It's a ram. It has horns." So I made my third drawing, but it was rejected like the others. "No, this one's too old. I want a sheep that will live a very long time." So then, impatiently, since I was in a hurry and to start working on my engine, I scribbled this drawing and added, "This is just the crate. The sheep you want is inside." But I was amazed to see my young critic's face light up. "That's just the kind I wanted. Do you think the sheep will need a lot of grass?" "Why?" "Because where I live, everything is very small." "There's sure to be enough. I've given you a very small sheep." He bent over the drawing. "Not so small as all that. Look, he's gone to sleep." And that's how I made the acquaintance of the little prince. It took me a long time to understand where he came from. The little prince, who asked me so many questions, never seemed to hear the ones I asked him. It was things he said quite at random that, bit by bit, explained everything. For instance, when he first caught sight of my airplane, "I won't draw my airplane. That would be too complicated for me," he asked. "What's that thing over there?" "It's not a thing. It flies. It's an airplane. My airplane." And I was proud to tell him I could fly. Then he exclaimed, "What? You fell out of the sky?" "Yes," I said modestly. "Oh, that's funny." And the little prince broke into a lovely peal of laughter, which annoyed me a good deal. I like my misfortunes to be taken seriously. Then he added, "So you fell out from the sky too? What planet are you from?" That was when I had the first clue to the mystery of his presence, and I questioned him sharply. "Do you come from another planet?" But he made no answer. He shook his head a little, still staring at my airplane. "Of course, that couldn't have brought you from very far." And he fell into a reverie that lasted a long while. Then, taking my sheep out of his pocket, he plunged into contemplation of his treasure. You can imagine how intrigued I was by this hint about other planets. I tried to learn more. "Where do you come from, little fellow? Where is this where I live of yours? Where will you be taking my sheep?" After a thoughtful silence, he answered, "The good thing about the crate you've given me is that he can use it for a house after dark." "Of course, and if you're good, I'll give you a rope to tie him up during the day and a stake to tie him to." This proposition seemed to shock the little prince. "Tie him up? What a funny idea!" "But if you don't tie him up, he'll wander off somewhere and get lost." My friend burst out laughing again. "Where could he go?" "Anywhere, straight ahead." Then the little prince remarked quite seriously, "Even if he did, everything's so small where I live." And he added, perhaps a little sadly, "Straight ahead, you can't go very far." That was how I had learned a second very important thing, which was that the planet he came from was hardly bigger than a house. That couldn't surprise me much. I knew very well that except for the huge planets like Earth, Jupiter, Mars, and Venus, which had been given names, There are hundreds of others that are sometimes so small that it's very difficult to see them through a telescope. When an astronomer discovers one of them, he gives it a number instead of a name. For instance, he would call it asteroid 325. I have serious reasons to believe that the planet the little prince came from is asteroid B612. This asteroid has been sighted only once by telescope in 1909 by a Turkish astronomer who had been made a formal demonstration of his discovery at an international astronomical congress. But no one had believed him on an account of the way he was dressed. Grown-ups always are like that. Fortunately, for the reputation of asteroid B612, a Turkish dictator ordered his people, on pain of death, to wear European clothes. The astronomer repeated his demonstration in 1920, wearing a very elegant suit, and this time everyone believed him. If I've told you these details about asteroid B612, and if I've given you its number, it is on account of the grown-ups. Grown-ups like numbers. So when you tell them about a new friend, they never ask questions about what really matters. They never ask, what does his voice sound like? What games does he like best? Does he collect butterflies? They ask, how old is he? How many brothers does he have? How much does he weigh? How much money does his father make? Only then do they think they know him. If you tell grown-ups, I saw a beautiful red brick house with geraniums at the windows and doves on the roof, they won't be able to imagine such a house. You have to tell them, I saw a house worth 100,000 francs. Then they exclaim, oh, what a pretty house. So, if you tell them the proof of the little prince's existence is that he was delightful, that he laughed, and that he wanted a sheep, when someone wants a sheep that proves he exists, they shrug their shoulders and treat you like a child. But if you tell them the planet he came from is asteroid B612, then they'll be convinced and they won't bother you with their questions. That's the way they are. You must not hold it against them. Children should be very understanding of grown-ups. But, of course, those of us who understand life couldn't care less about numbers. I should have liked to begin this story like a fairy tale. I should have liked to say, once upon a time, there was a little prince who lived on a planet hardly any bigger than he was and who needed a friend. For those who understand life, that would sound much truer. The fact is, I don't want my book to be taken lightly. Telling these memories is so painful for me. It's already been 6 years since my friend went away. Taking his sheep with him, if I try to describe him here, it's so I won't forget him. It's sad to forget a friend. Not everyone has had a friend. And I might become like the grown-ups who are no longer interested in anything but numbers. Which is still another reason why I've bought a box of paints and some pencils. It's hard to go back to drawing, at my age, when you've never made any attempts since the one of a boa from the inside and the one of a boa from outside at the age of 6. I'll certainly try to make my portraits as true to life as possible. But I'm not entirely sure of succeeding. One drawing works and the next no longer bears any resemblance. And I'm a little off on his height, too. In this one, The little prince is too tall, and here he's too short, and I'm uncertain about the color of his suit. So I grope in on one direction and another as best as I can, but in the end, I'm sure to get certain more important details all wrong. But here you'll have to forgive me. My friend never explained anything. Perhaps he thought I was like himself, but I unfortunately cannot see a sheep through the sides of a crate. I may be a little like the grown-ups, and I must have grown old. Every day I'd learn something about the little prince's planet, about his departure, about his journey, and it would come quite gradually. In the course of his remarks, this was how I learned on the third day about the drama of the baobabs. This time, too, I had the sheep to thank, for suddenly the little prince asked me a question as if I overcame a grave doubt. Isn't it true that sheep eat bushes? Yes, that's right. Ah, I'm glad. I didn't understand why it was so important that sheep should eat bushes, but the little prince added, and therefore they eat baobabs too? I pointed out to the little prince that baobabs are not bushes but trees as tall as churches, and that even if he took a whole herd of elephants back to his planet, that herd couldn't finish off a single baobab. The idea of the herd of elephants made the little prince laugh. We'd have to pile them on top of one another, but he observed perceptively. Before they grow big, baobabs start out by being little. True enough, but why do you want your sheep to eat little baobabs? He answered, Oh, come on, you know, as if we were talking about something quite obvious, and I was forced to make a great mental effort to understand his problem all by myself. And in fact, on the little prince's planet, there were, as on all planets, good plants and bad plants. The good plants come from good seeds, and the bad plants from bad seeds. But the seeds are invisible. They sleep in the secrecy of the ground until one of them decides to wake up. Then it stretches and begins to sprout, quite timidly at first, a charming, harmless little twig reaching toward the sun. If it's a radish seed or a rosebush seed, you can tell, and you can let it sprout all it likes. But if it's the seed of a bad plant, you must pull the plant up right away, as soon as you can recognize it. As it happens, there were terrible seeds on the little prince's planet, baobab seeds. The planet's soil was infested with them. Now, if you attend to a baobab too late, you can never get rid of it again. It overgrows the whole planet. It roots, pierces right through it. And if the planet is too small, and if there are too many baobabs, they make it burst into pieces. It's a question of discipline, the little prince told me later on. When you've finished washing and dressing each morning, you must tend to your planet. You must be sure to pull up all the baobabs regularly, as soon as you can tell them apart from the rose bushes, which they closely resemble when they're very young. It's very tedious work, but very easy. And one day he advised me to do my best to make a beautiful drawing for the edification of the children where I live. If they travel someday, he told me, it could be useful to them. Sometimes there's no harm in postponing your work until later, but with baobabs, it's always a catastrophe. I knew one planet that was inhabited by a lazy man. He had neglected 3 bushes. So, following the little prince's instructions, I have drawn that planet. I don't much like assuming the tone of a moralist. But the danger of baobabs is so little recognized, and the risks run by anyone who might get lost on an asteroid are so considerable that for once I am making an exception to my habitual reserve. I say, children, watch out for baobabs. It's to warn my friends of a danger of which they, like myself, have long been aware or unaware that I worked so hard on this drawing. The lesson I'm teaching is worth the trouble. You may be asking, why are there no other drawings in this book as big as the drawing of the baobabs? There's a simple answer. I tried, but I couldn't manage it. When I drew the baobabs, I was inspired by a sense of urgency. Oh, little prince, gradually this was how I came to understand your sad little life. For a long time, your only entertainment was the pleasure of sunsets. I learned this new detail on the morning of the 4th day when you told me, I really like sunsets. Let's go look at one now. But we have to wait. What for? For the sun to set. At first, you seemed quite surprised, and then you laughed at yourself and you said to me, I think I'm still at home. Indeed, when it's noon in the United States, the sun, as everyone knows, is setting over France. If you could fly to France in 1 minute, you could watch the sunset. Unfortunately, France is much too far, but on your tiny planet, all you had to do was move your chair a few feet and you would watch the twilight whenever you wanted to. One day, I saw the sun set 44 times, and a little later, you added, when you're feeling very sad, sunsets are wonderful. On the day of the 44 times, you were feeling very sad? But the little prince didn't answer. On the 5th day, thanks again to the sheep, another secret of the little prince's life was revealed to me. Abruptly, with no preamble, he asked me, as if it were the fruit of a problem long pondered in silence. If a sheep eats bushes, does it eat flowers too? A sheep eats whatever it finds. Even flowers that have thorns? Yes, even flowers that have thorns. Then what good are thorns? I didn't know at the moment. I was very busy trying to unscrew a bolt that had jammed in my engine. I was quite worried, for my plane crash was beginning to seem extremely serious, and the lack of drinking water made me fear for the worst. What good are thorns? The little prince never let go of a question once he had asked it. I was annoyed by my jammed bolt, and I answered without thinking. Thorns are no good for anything. They're just flowers' way of being mean. Oh! But after a silence, he lashed out at me with a sort of bitterness. I don't believe you. Flowers are weak. They're naive. They reassure themselves whatever way they can. They believe their thorns make them frightening. I made no answer. At that moment, I was thinking, if this bolt stays jammed, I'll knock it off with the hammer. Again, the little prince disturbed my reflections. Then you think flowers? No, not at all. I don't think anything. I just whatever came in my head. I'm busy here with something serious. He stared at me astounded. Something serious? He saw me holding my hammer, my fingers black with grease, bending over an object he regarded as very ugly. You talk like grown-ups. That made me a little ashamed, but he added mercilessly, You confuse everything. You've got it all mixed up. He was really very annoyed. He tossed his golden curls in the wind. I know a planet inhabited by a red-faced gentleman. He's never smelled a flower. He's never looked at a star. He's never loved anyone. He's never done anything except add up numbers, and all day long he says over and over, just like you, I'm a serious man. I'm a serious man. And that puffs him up with pride. But he's not a man at all. He's a mushroom. He's a what? A mushroom. The little prince was now quite pale with rage. 4 millions of years, flowers have been producing thorns. For millions of years, sheep have been eating them all the same. And it's not serious trying to understand why flowers go through so much trouble to produce thorns that are good for nothing. It's not important, the war between the sheep and the flowers. It's no more serious and more important than the numbers that fat red gentleman is adding up. Suppose I happen to know a unique flower, one that exists nowhere in the world except on my planet, one that a little sheep can wipe out in a single bite one morning, just like that, without even realize what he's doing. That isn't important. His face turned red, and he went on. If someone loves a flower of which just one example exists among all the millions and millions of stars, that's enough to make him happy when he looks at the stars, he tells himself. My flower's up there somewhere. But if the sheep eats the flower, then for him, that's as if suddenly all the stars went out, and that isn't important. He couldn't say another word. All of a sudden, he burst out sobbing. Night had fallen. I dropped my tools. What did I care about my hammer, about my bolt, about thirst, about death? There was on one star, on one planet, on mine, the earth, a little prince to be consoled. I took him in my arms. I rocked him. I told him, the flower you love is not in danger. I'll draw you a muzzle for your sheep. I'll draw you a fence for your flower. I didn't know what to say, how clumsy I felt. I didn't know how to reach him, where to find him. It's so mysterious, the land of tears. I soon learned to know that flower better on the little prince's planet. There had always been very simple flowers, decorated with a single row of petals so that they took up no room at all and got in no one's way. They would appear one morning in the grass and would fade by nightfall. But this one had grown from a seed, brought from who knows where, and the little prince had kept a close watch over a sprout that was not like any of the others. It might have been a new kind of a baobab. But the sprout soon stopped growing and began to show signs of blossoming. The little prince, who had watched the development of an enormous bud, realized that some sort of miraculous apparition would emerge from it. But the flower continued her beauty preparations in the shelter of her green chamber, selecting her colors with the greatest care and dressing, quite deliberately, Adjusting her petals one by one, she had no desire to emerge all rumpled like the poppies. She wished to appear only in the full radiance of her beauty. Oh, yes, she was quite vain. And her mysterious adornment had lasted days and days. And then one morning, precisely at sunrise, she showed herself. And after having labored so painstakingly, she yawned and said, "Ah, I'm hardly awake. Forgive me, I'm still all untidy." But the little prince couldn't contain his admiration. "How lovely you are!" "Aren't I?" the flower answered sweetly. "And I was born the same time as the sun." The little prince realized that she wasn't any too modest, but she was so dazzling. "I believe it's breakfast time," she had soon added. "Would you be so kind as to tend to me?" And the little prince, utterly abashed, having gone to look for a watering can, served the flower. She had soon begun tormenting him with her rather touchy vanity. One day, for instance, alluding to her 4 thorns, she remarked to the little prince, "I'm ready for tigers with all their claws." "There are no tigers on my planet," the little prince had objected. "And besides, tigers don't eat weeds." "I am not a weed," the flower sweetly replied. "Forgive me. I am not at all afraid of tigers, but I have a horror of drafts. You wouldn't happen to have a screen." "A horror of drafts? That's not good for a sign for a plant," the little prince had observed. "How complicated this flower is." "After dark, you will put me under glass. How cold it is where you live. Quite uncomfortable. Where I come from—" But she suddenly broke off. She had come here as a seed. She couldn't have known anything of other worlds. Humiliated at having let herself be caught on the verge of so naive a lie, she coughed 2 or 3 times in order to put the little prince in the wrong. "That screen? I was going to look for one, but you were speaking to me." Then she made herself cough again, in order to inflict a twinge of remorse on him at the same time. So the little prince, despite all the goodwill of his love, had soon come to mistrust her. He had taken seriously certain inconsequential remarks and had grown very unhappy. "I shouldn't have listened to her," he confided to me one day. "You must never listen to flowers. You must look at them and smell them. Mine perfumed my planet, but I didn't know how to enjoy that. The business about the tiger claws, instead of annoying me, ought to have moved me." And he confided further, "In those days, I didn't understand anything. I should have judged her according to her actions, not her words. She perfumed my planet and lit up my life. I should have never run away. I ought to have realized the tenderness underlying her silly pretensions. Flowers are so contradictory, but I was too young to know how to love her." In order to make his escape, I believe he took advantage of a migration of wild birds. On the morning of his departure, he put his planet in order. He carefully raked out his active volcanoes. The little prince possessed 2 active volcanoes, which were very convenient for warming his breakfast. He also possessed 1 extinct volcano. But, as he said, you never know. So he raked out the extinct volcano too. If they are properly raked out, volcanoes burn gently and regularly without eruptions. Volcanic eruptions are like fires in a chimney, of course. On Our Earth, we are much too small to rake out our volcanoes, and that's why they cause us so much trouble. The little prince also uprooted a little, sadly, the last baobab shoots, as he believed he would never be coming back. But all these familiar tasks seemed very sweet to him on his last morning, and when he watered the last of his flower and put her under glass, he felt like crying. "Goodbye," he said to the flower, but she did not answer him. "Goodbye," he repeated, but the flower coughed, but not because she had a cold. "I've been silly," she told him at last. "I ask for your forgiveness. Try to be happy." He was surprised that there would be no reproaches. He stood there, quite bewildered, holding the glass bell in midair. He failed to understand this calm sweetness. "Of course I love you," the flower told him. "It was my fault you never knew. It doesn't matter. But you were just as silly as I was. Try to be happy. Put that glass thing down. I don't want it any more." "But the wind! My cold isn't that bad. The night air will do me good. I'm a flower." "But the animals! I need to put up with 2 or 3 caterpillars if I want to get to know the butterflies. Apparently, they're very beautiful. Otherwise, who will visit me? You'll be far away. As for the big animals, I'm not afraid of them. I have my own claws." And she naively showed her 4 thorns. Then she added, "Don't hang around like this. It's irritating. You made up your mind to leave. Now go." For she didn't want him to see her crying. She was such a proud flower. He happened to be in the vicinity of asteroids 325, 326, 327, 328, 329, and 330. So he began by visiting them to keep himself busy and learn something. The first asteroid was inhabited by a king. Wearing purple and ermine, he was sitting on a simple yet majestic throne. "Ah, here's a subject," the king exclaimed when he caught sight of the little prince. And the little prince wondered, how can he know who I am if he's never seen me before? He didn't realize that for kings, the world is extremely simplified. All men are subjects. "Approach the throne so I can get a better look at you," said the king, very proud of being a king for someone at last. The little prince looked around for a place to sit, but the planet was covered by the magnificent ermine cloak. So he remained standing, and since he was tired, he yawned. "It is a violation of etiquette to yawn in a king's presence," the monarch told him. "I forbid you to do so." "I can't help it," answered the little prince, quite embarrassed. "I've made a long journey, and I hadn't had any sleep." "Then I command you to yawn," said the king. "I haven't seen anyone yawn for years. For me, yawns are a curiosity. Come on, yawn again. It is an order." "That intimidates me. I can't do it now," said the little prince, blushing deeply. "Well, well," the king replied, "then I command you to yawn sometimes, and sometimes to—" He was sputtering a little and seemed annoyed, for the king insisted that his authority be universally respected. He would tolerate no disobedience, being an absolute monarch, but since he was a kindly man, all his commands were reasonable. "If I were to command," he would often say, "if I were to command a general to turn into a seagull, and if the general did not obey, that would not be the general's fault, it would be mine." "May I sit down?" the little prince timidly inquired. "I command you to sit down," the king replied, majestically gathering up a fold of his ermine robe. But the little prince was wondering. The planet was tiny. Over what could the king really reign? Sire, he ventured, excuse me for asking. I command you to ask, the king hastened to say. Sire, over what do you reign? Over everything, the king answered with great simplicity. Over everything? With a discreet gesture, the king pointed to his planet, to the other planets, and to the stars. Over all that? Asked the little prince. Over all that, the king answered. For not only was an absolute monarch, but a universal monarch, he claimed. And do the stars obey you? Of course, the king replied. They obey immediately. I tolerate no insubordination. Such power amazed the little prince. If he had wielded it himself, he could have watched not 44, but 72, or even 100, even 200 sunsets on the same day without ever having to move his chair. And since he was feeling rather sad on account of remembering his own little planet, which he had forsaken, he ventured to ask a favor of the king. I'd like to see a sunset. Do me a favor, your majesty. Command the sun to set. If I commanded a general to fly from one flower to the next like a butterfly, or to write a tragedy, or to turn into a seagull, and if the general did not carry out my command, which of us would be in the wrong, the general or me? You would be, said the little prince quite firmly. Exactly. One must command from each what can perform, the king went on. Authority is based first off all upon reason. If you command your subjects to jump in the ocean, there will be a revolution. I am entitled to command obedience because my orders are reasonable. Then my sunset? Insisted the little prince, who never let go of a question once he asked it. You shall have your sunset. I shall command it. But I shall wait, according to my science of government, until conditions are favorable. And when will that be? Inquired the little prince. Well, well, replied the king, first consulting a large calendar. Well, that will be that will be tonight, around 7:40, and you'll see how well I am obeyed. The little prince yawned. He was regretting his lost sunset, and besides, he was already growing a little bored. I have nothing further to do here, he told the king. I'm going to be on my way. Do not leave, answered the king, who was so proud of having a subject. Do not leave. I shall make you my minister. A minister of what? Of justice. But there's no one here to judge. You never know, the king told him. I have not yet explored the whole of my realm. I'm very old. I have no room for a carriage, and it wearies me to walk. Oh, but I've already seen for myself, said the little prince, leaning forward to glance one more time at the other side of the planet. There's no one over there either. Then you shall pass judgment on yourself, the king answered. That is the hardest thing of all. It is much harder to judge yourself than to judge others. If you succeed in judging yourself, it's because you are truly a wise man. But I can judge myself anywhere, said the little prince. I don't need to live here. Well, the king said, I have a good reason to believe that there is an old rat living somewhere on my planet. I hear him at night. You could judge that old rat, and from time to time you will condemn him to death. That way his life will depend on your justice, but you'll pardon him each time for the economy's sake. There's only one rat. I don't like condemning anyone to death, the little prince said, "and now I think I'll be on my way." "No," said the king. The little prince, having completed his preparations, had no desire to aggrieve the old monarch. "If your majesty desires to be promptly obeyed, he should give me a reasonable command. He might command me, for instance, to leave before this minute is up. It seems to me that the conditions are favorable." The king having made no answer, the little prince hesitated at first, and then, with a sigh, took his leave. I make you my ambassador," the king hastily shouted after him. He had a great air of authority. "Grown-ups are so strange," the little prince said to himself as he went on his way. And this, my friends, concludes part 1 of The Little Prince. I will be back, can't say when, for listening ears, but let me know what you guys think of this story so far. Of course, you're welcome in the live chat to discuss, and in the comment section, you know where to find me on Instagram. And I thank you for sharing your time with me. We will be back with part 2 and possibly a part 3. And I hope you have a great rest of your day, and that you are walking in this new year feeling empowered and feeling your best. I know some people have reached out to me and let me know they are sick, so I will keep you in my prayers today. Have a great rest of your day. See you later.